Welcome back to The Vote Matters. I'm your host, Tia Sneem, and here at TVM we discuss political topics to a nonpartisan and entertaining manner to empower you, the voter. Sitting alongside me today is the producer, and today's topic of discussion is we'll be breaking down kind of how media influence and just the media industry itself is going to be changing and adapting, especially after this, most recent election, because it seems like there's been a lot of shifts occurring within the last couple of weeks since Trump has won the presidency.
Oh, yeah. I think we had a discussion about this where we talked about the legacy media more than likely is going to have to change. It's not going to be able to stay as it was. That was our prediction, that in the future, when it comes to presidential elections and the influencing capability of the legacy media it'll have diminished so much that we'll have other things fill in the space, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't believe how fast it collapsed as soon as he got elected. I mean, Comcast was right out the door like, we're getting rid of MSNBC, we're going to start putting that out there, and they're trying to spin it off as a separate company, right? Mm-hmm. And the reason they're trying to do that is they're just trying to distance themselves from what that has become, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you look at the ratings, like you look at the demographics around MSNBC about specific shows, like the Rachel Maddow show, or Morning Joe, or Joy Reid. They're just in the tank. I mean, they have absolutely collapsed when it comes to their ratings. And there's no longer credibility there. Mm-hmm. I think that's the biggest thing that came out of this whole thing. They pushed a certain narrative to give people a certain perspective that didn't pan out, right? And so I think they're very frustrated, and they kept pushing the same narrative, hoping it would have some effect on this election, and it didn't. Mm-hmm. And I think that was very obvious to Comcast. Hey, this is no longer a body of influence. Mm-hmm. This is now becoming something that's just costing me money, costing me reputation, and actually has a negative aspect. And so Comcast just says, it's time to cut the ties with this whole thing. So really fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Mm-hmm. And you think it's also, it doesn't seem like a lot of people own cable or own like certain type of TV applications anymore, right? It seems like everything's either feeded through X, Instagram, YouTube, Rumble, like all these other platforms are now starting up.
Yeah, and so let's look at like what Fox is doing, right? So mm-hmm. Fox News was really smart that they took a little bit, and not to say it is a conservative channel, but they took a little bit more of a conservative approach with regard to certain things, and so it still gives them credibility. And so they do a lot of these like snippets, right? And they put them out on YouTube, or they put them out on Instagram.
Yeah, the sound bites.
Yeah, these 5-minute little segments and everything like that. And they still get tremendous amount of viewerships and followings, whereas they do the same thing for, let's say, shows for MSNBC or I think it's NCBS. They're not getting that kind of viewership. So it's not that they're not following the same model. It's the people that they're using basically no longer have credibility that people want to follow them. Mm. And that's a big pain point for them. I think, at least for the hosts and people who are on the air for Fox, they still have some credibility. But again, I see their ratings and everything are, again, still not like what it used to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we talked a little bit about it, where did we see the news take this shift where, it lost its credibility, or it lost its, like, for my sake, I don't necessarily look or watch the news too frequently, because they will be saying one thing, and then after they've spoken about that one thing, it comes out that that topic was not necessarily true, right? There wasn't a lot of validity behind what was being spoken about. So I think where we started seeing this was definitely, I would say around 2016, 2017, and then definitely during the COVID pandemic is when all this, like, baggage was becoming unleashed, right? Like, all the lies that were being spoken about were now being shown to the public eye, and the public eye became very weary of everything that the news media was trying to push, right? And maybe that's why the ratings are taking a dip too, is because I myself am not going to watch something when there's no credibility behind what's being said.
Yeah, I agree. The media sort of started going off the rails when Trump got elected, right? I think COVID pushed it even further off the rails. But people were still watching it, right? There was still an entertainment value to it. There was still some kind of information somebody was getting from it. But what people started seeing, I think the thing that really undermined it more than anything was the whole process of lawfare, right? The whole persecution, political persecution of a candidate. And they saw this not only with Donald Trump, they saw this on RFK Jr., and they're like sitting there going, huh. And then they started seeing it with the other places. And I think that's where people started saying, okay, this has now gotten from entertainment to basically very close to authoritative, right? To where we're being propagandized versus being informed. And I think that's when people started saying, okay, we're not listening to this anymore. It's not about, hey, entertaining. It's about propagandizing people. And I think that's the piece that really hurt them. And that really showed up in this election was the whole propaganda. I mean, especially at the end when they're touting about, oh, he's a Nazi, oh, he's a dictator, oh, you know. And it's like, really, you know, you really can't use that kind of inflammatory language if there's no real evidence. Because, you know, saying Nazi is like, that's really degrading to Jews. And it's really degrading to, let's say, gypsies or other people that were persecuted by the Nazis during World War II, right? There was millions of people just slaughtered, you know, for no good reason other than they weren't of the proper ethnicity. That's just not a way things should be. You can't call a candidate that without that kind of, like, really strong evidence. That's just crazy. And I think that's where people started saying, okay, you've gone over the line. You really used really harsh tones and language that makes no sense. So why are you saying it? Other than to propagandize me, in order to tell me what to do, not sort of educate me so I could get to my own conclusion, right? And that became very obvious. And I think that's where everybody sort of just like, all right, we're done watching this stuff.
That was a big part. And then what I saw too was then you had the counter movement coming from that, right? Now you had people on YouTube really going in and talking about, you know, how wrong all that stuff was, right? And so now it's like, it's not necessarily that you saw it happen. Now it's also, there's all these breakdown videos of people being like, here's an example of what's going on. Don't follow for the, or don't believe what's being said here because this is actually what they're trying to say, you know? So they're exposing the truth of how media operates.
Absolutely. I think that was the huge sort of eye-opener for Comcast, right? Is like this MSNBC is pushing this sort of narrative about Nazism and Trump and this guy's evil, RFK Jr. is a nut, all this kind of stuff, right? But people get a lot of information from YouTube channels, right? They're listening to Joe Rogan. They're listening to the Rubin Report. They're listening to Megyn Kelly. They're listening to
Redacted,
all these other places that are giving you a counterpoint and saying, no, that just doesn't make sense. And when you start comparing the two, you started seeing the influence of the podcasters overtaking mainstream media. It was like, wow, it was like
I mean, we've talked about it where you look at a Joe Rogan viewership and his numbers surge. Same with like even some of these smaller channels, like, you know, Redacted, right? Like they're a big channel, but the fact that that channel gets more viewership than per se mainstream news, it shows a lot. It shows that people are using new resources to gain their information.
Well, think about it. Like the other thing too was really fascinating is when you're watching, let's say J.D. Vance, or you're watching Trump as he's going out there and stumping for the presidency, right? And he's stopping at all these venues. He has these huge crowds. And who are the people that he's bringing along with him? Podcasters.
Influencers.
Yeah, unbelievable. He wasn't bringing, Lester Holt or bringing in some Lester Hayes or anything like that. He wasn't bringing in, Sean Hannity. He was bringing real influencers who were going to make a difference about how people think of what his campaign represents, right? Clearly, that's the direction things are going, right? So this is why Comcast is looking to sort of spin off MSNBC and other cable network programs.
Yeah, well, it'll be an interesting route that they take. And it'll be interesting, too, to see what other news platforms will come from this, especially now that it'll probably take a completely new spin.
Well, actually, the funniest thing is you see them panicking because even Elon Musk is like, maybe I will buy it, right? And everybody's like, oh! So it is fascinating with all this happening, I think, seeing people sort of panic a little bit about what's going to happen in their future.
Yep. Well, be sure to comment something in the comment section and tell us kind of where you think the new age of media will be going. But as always, the vote matters, and stay tuned for more upcoming content.